it says something about our own kind of collective darkness. So I think about, well, what are we, the 21st century audience? We need to reconnect to the fact that we can still be deeply superstitious. We can still be very, very paranoid.
Welcome to the Crooked Table podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to dig into their personal connection to a current or classic release. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the 2015 horror film, The Witch, and I'm honored to welcome to the show Amy Otero. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, before we get into the actual movie itself, what are your kind of your thoughts, and this is, I guess, leading into the conversation, on writer-director Robert Eggers and his very distinctive take on what a horror movie is? Because I know when The Witch came out, people were very divided on, does this count as a horror movie? Like, a lot of horror people were kind of, I think, complaining on it. I feel like I did an episode at one point, and then my brother was on the show, and even he was like, yeah, it's not The Witch, and then I eventually checked it out and had a completely different reaction, which we'll get into. But what are your thoughts on kind of his approach to the genre? And then we can talk about The Lighthouse for a bit.
Well, actually, I'm very grateful for his contribution because I am a person, I have always had an appreciation for the terrific, the things that incite terror. But I cannot abide jump scares and an excess of them. It alienates me as an audience member if you do it a couple of times and it's well threaded in the narrative, because I want to have the immersive experience. I want to jump if the character jumps. I want to feel those things. But I think after a while, for me, I just feel like I'm being exploited, like the technique itself is being exploited. I'm also not a lover of gore. I have an appreciation for it as an art form. I understand. I just do. I've had a lot of friends who are artists who are very, who are gore enthusiasts and have kind of helped me appreciate what it is. But in terms of it being part of the horror story that I want to be involved in, I just don't particularly respond to those things. And those are things I think that have dominated the genre for a good long time. Like, for instance, the works that made impressions on me as a child would be like The Omen and Rosemary's Baby, where so much of it I felt like was camera and character and music and holding the moment long enough to let the audience be uncertain for a moment what was going to happen. And I think this guy brings that back to me, and I feel kind of like I'm being included again in the horror audience, because I do appreciate a good scary story. I mean, I love them. But I don't like jump scares.
Well, jump scares are inherently cheap. I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
And as far as gore, that's a useful tool, and there is an element of, I'm thinking of the Evil Dead movies, especially. Yeah. Gore is a part of it. But it's not inherently scary in and of itself. Just because something is bloody and messy doesn't mean it is by its very nature terrifying. I mean, right, I think Sam Raimi was one of the people that does that the best. I'm thinking like the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV show, which is really gory, but almost more funny than it is scary. It's just like it creates I think certain filmmakers need to know how to employ that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the frustration that maybe lovers of the horror genre might have had with The Witch. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it didn't have jump scares was not the only thing that, resonated with me. Just to answer, your initial question, the idea of who he is as a director or what he's doing. And this being his, essentially his maiden voyage. His first, feature-length film. This is what I noticed about him. And then I saw it repeated in The Lighthouse. The same things that he was employing were the things that to me were reminiscent of Rosemary's Baby or The Omen, where you are given a brief glimpse into a deeply disturbing image, and he just holds it long enough for you to kind of focus on what you're looking at, but then he takes it away from you. And so you're stuck with that image just like lingering in the foreground of your consciousness, and you don't really know what you saw. And I liked that about the Lighthouse too. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think both movies too, they share, well, kind of a period setting. They share a very specific way of talking, like especially in The Witch. I mean, I guess in both of them, there's a very specific dialect that's used. It's more about creating an environment and an aesthetic than it is just, neither of these is set in like, 2020 where people are either texting and all that stuff. There's certain timelessness to both of them, I think.
Yeah.
That makes it easier for us in a way to be sucked into the situation, because it is already something completely foreign from our experience, and therefore already kind of scary just because we don't know what to expect.
Yeah, I agree. Both works were deeply immersive for me. I really lost track of kind of time and space while watching them. I mean, and I love any series or movie that really has me believing that I'm there. And I think like the successful part is how viscerally uncomfortable both settings were, but still very, I don't know, magical and ethereal and I don't know. It was, yeah. I mean, I could talk about almost any aspect of because I just you brought up setting, and now I'm like paralleling scenes from both pieces.
Right.
I'm thinking of the Lighthouse and the fuzziness. There was so much. I feel like, at least I haven't rewatched The Lighthouse, but my memory of it was that there were just moments of just fuzziness. Like you really don't know what you're looking at. The light would become very, very bright, and it would kind of, overexpose for a minute. And again, you're uncomfortable watching, like you're physically uncomfortable watching it because the light is so intense, the literal light of the lighthouse,
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you don't know, in both films, I think at various points you're like, is something truly supernatural happening, or is it just an unreliable narrator, or is it just like a metaphorical moment that's in the film itself? And so because of that, you are kind of infected in a way by the sort of paranoia and descent into madness that I think is present in both movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The more I think about it, the more they really are like, it's astonishingly close in a lot of the techniques and work in a way as almost companion pieces, actually.
Yeah, they're definitely descents into hell. I mean, there's definitely layers to it as well. It just keeps getting deeper and deeper. Yeah, I'm just thinking about The Witch, and if you follow Thomasin as a character and you say it's her story, is it a descent into madness or a descent into hell for her? Mm-hmm. Or if you choose to look at it like the character is the entire family and what happens to them. And absolutely, I mean, that's certainly a descent of like biblical proportions, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot of symbolism in both, especially, I mean, honestly, especially in the Lighthouse. There's a lot going on with the seagulls and with what the light represents and all of that kind of, like, I feel like both of these, each of them, and kind of have a deep dive analysis, and we'll be here for several hours. And I think it's really encouraging to go back to the genre as a whole, the fact that, I feel like the last decade or so, it's been a lot of, as you sort of alluded to, the sort of torture porn kind of thing, where it's just...
That phrase, I use that phrase a lot because that was something that was really for a while there deterring me from Game of Thrones back in season 4 and season 5, somewhere in there, where I just was like, okay, well, at some point you've surpassed character development. What is the value of this scene?
Right. Right. And I think you're seeing kind of a new class of horror filmmakers emerging just in the last few years. With thinking like Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele, and Ari Aster, and Jennifer Kent. I don't know if you've seen The Babadook, but that's like another one that I feel like is very psychological in its approach to horror. And I think that obviously tends to unsettle us much more than, oh, that's gross. That kind of thing just sounds good.
Right. No, I have not seen The Babadook. I just watched Midsommar.
Okay.
That's I can't bring myself to watch Hereditary because I know what happens in it. And everyone who knows me says, you know what, you don't need to watch that movie.
Yeah, there's always
so I will resist doing that. But I do want to see The Babadook. My daughter's been begging me to watch it with her. She finds it fascinating and loves talking about it. Made quite an impression on her.
Yeah. It's, again, one of those where you can tell that the horror is really representing kind of a real life experience. I think in this movie, The Witch, it's really about more paranoia and I guess religious fanaticism and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the family's an existential crisis. I mean, they're having a spiritual crisis, and that's no small thing, But yeah, I was just you were talking about the Babadook and the common denominators among the recent filmmakers that these hard, and it makes me kind of think about Edgar Allan Poe. And the kind of the point of view that's so characteristic of his work, and how we're given, as an audience, we're given this opportunity to be in this consciousness, this first person point of view, and it's typically a pretty deeply deranged or at least unraveling person. It's point of view. It's like a So those works kind of remind me, these works kind of remind me of what I like about Edgar Allan Poe and what actually does create horror and suspense. And for me, it's that tie to the narrator,
Yeah, there's a certain classical nature, I think, to Robert Eggers' work in both the movies. And a lot of the ones that we're seeing now, I mean, there's either, like I said, there's either some kind of psychological, metaphorical component that this supernatural element is really standing in for this, psychological phenomena or whatever, or kind of imbuing it with more of a sense of social commentary, like Jordan Peele's, Us and Get Out and things like that. And I think we're seeing it's an exciting time, I think, for horror fans to witness sort of all these fresh voices bringing such, exciting and very different perspectives to the genre. And I think Robert Eggers, just with The Witch alone, but I think with The Lighthouse, he just really affirmed the fact that he has a lot to say about a lot of different things, and he's making movies that feel in a way like not of this time, and I think that's not just because they're set in period settings, but also The Lighthouse being completely in black and white, and the performance style specifically from Willem Dafoe, who I don't know how he didn't get an Academy Award nomination for that.
Oh,
but,
I know.
Okay, that's a whole political crap.
He was very mythical. That was beautiful casting.
Yeah, he was amazing in that. And the film just got cinematography, and that's it, which is, again, kind of ridiculous. The Witch didn't get any nominations whatsoever, as far as I'm aware, which is insanity. And we'll get more into that in a second.
Well, you had mentioned just that about it being a period piece, and it's not just a period piece. And for me, I think part of the beauty of both films has everything to do with its setting, because I feel like both pieces are, in a way, for lack of a better word, a love letter to New England.
That's true.
Like his I watched a couple of videos with him talking, and I mean, he really has he has really spent most of his life studying New England folklore, and And I think that there was a reverence there that's obvious in the work. There was a reverence for the setting and for the people, you know. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's a tendency to really to make Puritans kind of cartoonishly ridiculous, you know, because the whole idea, I mean, and this was such a nuanced perspective of just these people just being real people trying to live in accordance with their faith and their principles while dealing with pride and temptation and resentment and all the things that make us human. You know, it was a difficult existence to be a Puritan. And I feel like only a kid in New England, growing up in New England, making a point of studying New England would have that kind of sensitivity that I feel like both works, even though the Lighthouse is so fantastical. Just, I mean, like I think he definitely calls The Witch a New England folktale, and I think he called the Lighthouse a New England myth or something myth. He referred
it's
to it.
Definitely it's very steeped in the mythology.
Right.
And Willem Dafoe's character mentions that throughout. He talks about, that's bad. That's a bad omen. And like everything is sort of kind of tied into Prometheus and that whole thing.
Yeah, it makes you want to have like a copy of Rime of the Ancient Mariner, you know, like on your person while you're watching it.
Right, kind of. Yeah, absolutely. And I think to The Witch as well, it's also the family dealing with tragedy in the midst of their faith. I mean, and then that's something that you saw just recently in Midsommar, which the whole thing kind of spirals out of personal tragedy and how we react to that and how it shifts our perspective and stuff. And I feel like we're now really keying into the actual movie itself. But did you have anything else more on a broader sense you wanted to get into before we just get into the movie?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
All right. Well, then before we launch into our conversation, let's listen to a little bit of the trailer for The Witch.
Curse this family.
Who's there?
That was a little bit of the trailer for The Witch from 2015 from writer-director Robert Eggers. So, Amy, why did you want to talk about this film specifically?
Well, there's so many things I just find fascinating about it. It really made an impression on me. But I'll just start with the first thing. I love that damn goat. I just think that animal is hilarious and wonderful. And one of the things I did after I've seen the movies a couple of times, but immediately after the first time I saw it, I went online to, read about this guy and why this film and why this story.
Right.
And I just stumbled upon this little story about how, they did not expect to get as much footage of that goat as they actually did, because it was just like putting it out there in all of its goatiness. And it really did break that actor's rib.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was quite, so I don't know, that whole story, I just thought like the imagery, he said it's such a powerful image. Mm-hmm. It was such a beautiful animal. And that just with the cinematography and the monochromatic, I just thought it was a beautiful aesthetic. I just thought it was a really beautiful, beautiful film. And then the second time I watched it with the subtitles, and I just appreciated the beauty of the language. Mm-hmm. that's kind of one of my favorite time periods, literarily speaking. And the actors speaking those lines in that dialect and the writing of them, the way he wrote them, it was just one thing after another. Every time I watched the film, there was just something else that I deeply appreciated,
Yeah, I really like Black Phillip as well.
He's a meme now.
He is. He really is. That line is iconic. The
right.
living deliciously.
Right.
And it's delivered so perfectly. It sounds like I know it's not the same actor, but it almost sounds like it almost sounds like Darth Maul a little bit. It's like, would you like to live life deliciously? That kind of thing. And I agree with you. The early modern English that's used in the movie just really it sweeps you up in a way where it feels like no other horror movie that we've ever seen before. And the cast of actors that we've never seen. I know Anya Taylor-Joy has now been in a bunch of stuff. If they ever release it, will be in that X-Men: The New Mutants, which has been pushed for like 3 years. She was in Split and all those other things. So, but when this came out, nobody knew who any of these people were. So it almost sort of feels like they're real. Like this is just a society. Then they just cast a real Puritan family in this movie. Almost, it has it's not found footage like Blair Witch, but it has that sort of like, man, this feels too real. Like, and that makes everything that much more impactful, I think.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
So we start the movie off, and the family is banished. Do they even make it clear what they're banished for? I kind of didn't 100% catch that.
It's a disagreement.
Something about the religious.
It's a disagreement of the interpretation of Scripture, and Puritan, pure Scripture, little interpretation to no interpretation.
Right.
And so he felt in conflict with what was being interpreted through the church of that established commonwealth. And he was being put in a position to, surrender to their authority. But in doing that, he believed it put him at odds with Scripture.
Right.
So he refused and was banished. And he says something very interesting in that scene, which I think is often, like, I didn't even really hear it the first couple of times I saw it. But when they banish him, they kind of put it to him in a question, I think. And he responds with, "I would be glad on it." And that's it's like that's an interesting character thing there, because as you're watching him kind of, who can't admire, someone standing in defense of their religious convictions. This is not how I interpret the Word of God, and I am not going to, have you tell me what that means. I mean, the whole point of making the voyage across the sea was so that they could come to this new world and not be told how to interpret Scripture.
Right.
So when he says that, though, I should be glad on it, it really, really humanizes him. It's such a prideful moment. And I think that the only one in the shot that has a reaction is Thomasine. Her head whips around and she looks at him. And the rest of the family is standing, like, staring at the panel of judges. But she looks like almost, is that her, like, recognizing that pride is a sin. He's committing a sin. This is, wow. You're about to get us banished and you're glad about it. There's some kind of like moment there between, her and her father, unbeknownst to him, because he's standing in his pride,
right,
facing down his judges, and he says, I won't be judged by false Christians.
She does have a certain heightened sense of awareness and like a certain, I think, rebelliousness and bitterness. And that moment is probably the seed for all of that she knows if her father had reacted differently, they wouldn't be out on this, trying to start a new life with, their crops not growing, kind of starving and at each other's throats. They wouldn't be in this situation. And I think, that's probably the moment where she already starts to be sort of flippant, that later on she's messing with the kids about like, oh, I'm the Witch of the Wood. You kind of...
Right. I would completely agree with that, but I would argue that that moment actually comes after Samuel is abducted, because right prior to Samuel being abducted, she prays and she's on her knees. She's, the shot is framed to where she, we're looking down at her, she's looking up at us, she's got prayer hands, and she's just, she's begging God to fill her with light and for her to feel the Holy Spirit and to be forgiven and to show her grace and, forgive her wickedness and all of these things. And she's very penitent and she's very humble, and she is very, she's a very honest person in prayer. And then immediately after that, Samuel's taken and she receives the blame for every bad thing that happens on that farm, and it's, if you are Thomasine, that's how God does or does not answer your prayer.
Right.
That's hard. That's, and she is still, this is also kind of a weird coming of age story.
It is. It really is. I mean, the mother, Catherine, says at one point that, I forget how she phrases it because it's in early modern English, but that like she's basically at the beginnings of womanhood, essentially.
Yeah.
At least she's, I think supposed to be like 16, something like that, around there.
Right. That was the impression I got, 15.
Yeah, 15, 16.
Maybe even 14. But yeah, I mean, she has a real bad string of luck. I mean, the whole family does. We know that. But I'm not sure if any of the things that happen to Thomasin are a result of her inherent wickedness or pride.
Right.
I mean, maybe when she teases the sister,
Yeah. I mean, I don't think she's inherently wicked or prideful. I think it's a certain point she's like, no, I'm not the witch. I'm not the witch. I'm like, I'm not behind any of this. And then at a certain point, she's like, you know what? I might as well be behind this now. What else? I have nothing else left, and we're getting ahead of ourselves there. But I think it's kind of that situation that like the whole world turns against you and says you are one thing that you're like, yeah, sure, okay, fine. You say I'm that thing, now I'll be that thing, I guess. But
she's a scapegoat,
pretty much. Yeah. Unlike Black Phillip, who was a regular goat.
And she's also the least important person on that farm in terms of her value, because she is not, she's at this point, she's becoming a liability, because she's not going to, obviously to have sons on a farm are, that goes without saying. And when you have smaller daughters, they can do certain work. But once you start to have a daughter who's becoming an adult, she's an expense.
Right. Well, that's their first solution when things start to go bad. They're like, well, we need to get rid of Thomasin and send her off to another family.
Right. So it makes sense that she's so easily scapegoated, because I think if, in the hierarchy of Puritan society, the girl is on the bottom, so it's already woven into the collective psyche of the family, of the greater culture, of the religion itself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's just a natural assumption that, oh, well, there are witches here. Well, where's the young woman that's coming of age and all that implies, in quotes. Then she is the one who will be the least resistance to the devil, right? The devil will find the path of least resistance through her, because she's so inherently spiritually corrupt to begin with, that would be why all girls that age would just be, that there would always be a veil of suspicion around them anyway. So I think he's apt, and this is why, again, I feel like this is a guy who really knows the culture of where he came from, because I don't think the piece was feminist. But I don't think he was trying to tell a story through a feminist perspective or present a feminist piece. But as a feminist, I appreciated that detail to the story, that it was a reminder that I mean, remember the first thing her mother calls her when they finally have the confrontation is that you're a slut.
Yeah.
And I watched you try to seduce your brother.
And your dad, she says, I think, too.
And your father.
Yeah.
That's the first place the mother goes. It's just there. It's in the foreground of the consciousness for the world to see her that way.
Right.
So it's almost like, she's almost like in vain trying to be the person she was at the beginning when she's praying and begging for the light of God and for the Holy Spirit and for grace and all of these, which we get to see Caleb experience. Mm-hmm. Caleb gets to, I mean, if you believe that he was experiencing grace and was being saved, the mother believed that he was being damned. But I thought that was a moment of rapture for him.
Before he crosses over.
Yeah, because remember, he and the father have that conversation in the forest about Samuel and whether or not Samuel was in hell.
Right.
And they talk about the predestination or of Puritan belief that only God knows who are the sons of Abraham and who are doomed to go to hell. And that's a difficult way to see the world, because it's really saying that you need to walk the walk of Christianity your whole life. You need to be devout and to to say the gospel, to be in accordance with the Gospels and all those things. But at the end of your life, it's very possible you're going to go to hell anyway and be damned. Mm-hmm. And that whole faith to me, it just feels like it has to be in a constant state of crisis. How do you reconcile? How do you reconcile that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree.
And so, and Samuel has that moment, well, what will happen to me when I die, and then we get to see this happen to him, and he gets to experience rapture, which is the best possible thing a Puritan could ever want, ever. That's the point. And I think that was kind of telling, that it was Caleb that got, and, the the happy ending, I guess. Poor thing. I mean, that was such a tragic scene.
I know, and that actor does such a tremendous job with it too.
He did. He really did. There were a lot of things. Yeah, there were a lot of moments in these films that I think would have made me kind of uncomfortable being a child actor. But I didn't feel like any of it was creepy or anything like that. And I feel like that's probably a testament to, the director and his relationship with his actors.
Right. And it also feels true. Like you were saying, it feels true to the dynamic here, feels true to the time and to this society and kinds of the kind of questions that they would, if they were, dared enough to question their faith, that they would raise and that they would discuss. And I think the movie is kind of putting us almost in dialogue with that. It's like, well, yeah, does that? I mean, how does that all work? Like when you're coming from this extreme of a religious standpoint at this point, It's like, well, does that make sense? Like, what are how fair is this really when all is said and done? What is supposed to be our salvation and that kind of thing? And I think we see with Caleb earlier, Caleb, I think his big sin, as we see in the movie, is he's kind of lusting after his sister a little bit throughout the course of the movie. And that's how the witch is able to sort of entice him by appearing as like a beautiful woman in a red dress. And kind of, I guess, I don't even know. We don't see what happens off screen. We just see him show up naked randomly outside, kind of in a sort of trance, I guess. Right.
Yeah, that was pretty. That was a pretty horrible moment. I mean, again, deeply sexually repressed culture. Mm-hmm. I mean, all things natural are inherently corrupt. Nature is inherently corrupt. I mean, the idea is to civilize, to dominate those things that are wild, including the inner landscape, the human, our human darkness, those things that still tie us, I guess, to the animal world, So how do you come of age and not just a culture like that, but in the isolation that they were.
Right.
And that was one of the things that kind of felt like the whole, like the story of the family in isolation, the family on the fringes of civilization, the family outcast. Those were all things that felt very biblical to me, and those were also things that I recognized from like the early Puritan literature that I read in college, and the themes in those pieces, in those works, so ingrained like in every single shot. I felt like in some ways I was looking at a storybook, like the pages of a storybook. It was so that, again, coming back to that New England folktale authenticity. I mean, I'm not from New England. I've had a fascination with early New England, specifically puritanical, Puritan literature, colonial literature. And I have spent a little bit of time in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And I mean, it's got a lot of really, I probably should stop talking because I'm just like going off on the thread of like, how does the work function to tell us something about ourselves as Americans? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if we looked at it like, okay, yes, it's a New England folktale, and it perfectly characterizes the beliefs and the assumptions of the time period. And we see what happens to this family, and it's even a cautionary tale, warning against pride. All of those things. But I think about, okay, what about the contemporary audience? What does the 21st century audience look at and understand about ourselves? And that very much is a part of who we are as Americans and our American identity.
Right. Yeah.
That's one of the threads, and it's a pretty dominant thread, And I think we have to remember and kind of reconnect with the reality that, this is what people believed. This was the reality for people. The devil was real, and he was in the woods, and witches were real, and they were waiting to corrupt you. And we can turn on each other in the face of these things, and, in our fears. And that's what I think was one of the things that happened in the family, was that they kind of ultimately, they tried to hold it together, but it was an unraveling until it was eventually, the scene between her and her mother was one of the truly only really disturbing scenes for me. I had to look away in that moment. Mm-hmm. The other scenes didn't really disturb me, but that one was hard to watch.
Well, it's also, I think it's the, religious faith versus like they put so much trust in God, and their whole thing constantly is, oh, the Lord will provide for us, that kind of thing. They don't have the same trust in each other. So as soon as anything goes wrong, they're like, the pointing finger starts to happen, the mistrust, and it's kind of like this, I get, like the movie sort of, I guess, says the seeds of corruption in the family just blossom and overtake all of them until there's only one left standing. I wanted to get into the way that this movie is really bold in not only how dark it's willing to go, but toying with that supernatural element. I mean, we're like less than 10 minutes in before a baby gets stolen and sort of mashed into an ointment, basically. Right. And it's kind of brazen that the movie, not only does the movie, I feel like most films would just have the child be missing and then leave us with that, but not only does the child get taken, we see the child in the witch's lair, I guess, with the blade. Yes. We see the mashing on the application of what I guess is a flying ointment.
It's flying ointment.
Yeah.
And you definitely want the oil, the fat from an unbaptized baby. Mm-hmm. See, this guy knew this, I am currently teaching Macbeth right now, and I teach Macbeth through historical criticism, and we have to read a lot about, James I of England and his obsession with witches and the collective paranoia and the stuff that people wrote about what witches allegedly did. And and their recipes for things and their, their spells and all of this. And like that little detail right there was just, I was like, wow, like this guy knows, this guy did his research. And that scene also too is one of the examples of that fuzziness that I was talking about. Like, what am I looking at? Am I really seeing what I think I'm seeing? Right. And as soon as you start to kind of realize what you're looking at, he cuts, and it's enough. It's not too much, but that, yeah. And you're right. That was the first 10 or 12 minutes, I think.
Yeah. That moment with hide and seek is very early in the movie. And we see what happened with Samuel, where there's a period where they were wondering where is the child. And I think that they at some point just say, if the wolves didn't get him, hunger would have at this point.
Right.
And I think Catherine even takes William to task for the fact that I told you we should have baptized him. And he's like, we can't baptize him outside the congregation and all that. Where again, it falls back on his shoulders and that pride. I haven't tracked this, but I have a feeling if we go through this movie, we will find all of the 7 deadly sins very apparently pointed out. But there's pride, there's lust after your sister, there's envy over, whatever. Like, I feel like he purposefully baked all of them into the downfall of this family. And I think... Well, yeah, go ahead.
He said in an interview that he spent quite a long time reading prayer books and just Puritan clerical literature, And I think that you're probably right. I mean, I think that it's even, I think some of the dialogue even was lifted straight off the pages of some of those.
Yeah, he has a title card or something that says more or less something to that effect at the very end of the film.
Yes.
Which I caught as well.
Right.
But yes, and I think it's really interesting to me how the supernatural element is handled in that, we see the child taken, we see the child, used to make flying ointment, but we don't see any levitation or anything really magical until probably the last half hour. I think
what you're seeing is that he's making the choice to assume that we are all Puritans too, and we know what we're looking at.
Okay.
There isn't a here. Let me tell my audience that witches would use baby fat to make flying ointment to rub on their bodies, and that was so. There wasn't anything clinical about that scene. There was nothing explanatory about it. It was completely. It was just image. It was a completely almost kind of poetic scene.
Yeah, it makes it that much more unsettling because you're like, wait, what the hell is happening?
Exactly.
Like you said, the quick cut.
I think that again that there's an assumption that he makes that we get it, that we are already immersed in the culture, and that it's not anything he has to convince us. Hey, yes, in case you're wondering, these really are witches. Like that's again part of what I appreciated about it. And for the same thing, I think about films like Midsommar too. Yeah. Anyway.
I want to talk about obviously we already mentioned a little bit about Black Phillip, but the animals, there's also the rabbit that I guess it's an evil rabbit too at various points. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I think it's a hare.
Okay.
If it's, again, if he's borrowing from, 16th and 17th century lore about witches, then the hare is sacred to the witch. She's, it's one of the familiar forms. And it's because of its associations with the moon, and in the springtime and the full moon, the hares, they fight, they battle for their territorial dominance and so like the image of the hare dancing under the moonlight. I mean, what else dances under the moonlight? A witch. So of course these things are connected. So so I think I have an affinity for rabbits and hares. I think they're pretty amazing. But I liked how if you considered the hare the witch, then she's really in a lot more of the story than she really is kind of almost omnipresent in these moments, you know.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
movie really, I think, uses the sort of perverts the animal imagery as well. I mean, we have not. I think Thomason drops the egg, and it has like the dead baby chicken there. There's also the milk that turns to blood. I thought that was all really interesting, and I'm curious as to your reaction to some of that, and the way that if you're looking at this, like, I almost see this movie, the way it ends, as sort of in like a witch's recruitment, sort of, or like initiation, basically. Well, it's like they're grooming her for. Sorry, go ahead. They're grooming
it's
her
like like an anti-baptism, like a dark baptism kind of thing. Well, the interesting thing about the animals, and when you were talking about the animals, I was thinking about the dog and what happened to the dog, and I know that like the Elizabethan idea of there being the great chain of being, where there is a hierarchy of all life on the planet, all the way down to rocks and minerals, and it's all ranked. It's all ranked to its relation with God and how close it is to God. And there is a chain of being, a great chain of being for the animal world, and of course animals that are beautiful and powerful, like the lion or the bear or the wolf. These things would be ranked kind of high. Animals that can be domesticated and dominated, those would be animals that would be, rated pretty low, unless it was a dog, which was useful and essential to, man's success at life. And so when I think about the animals that are corrupted and the dog that is essentially destroyed by this evil, right? He can't persist because he's too good. Like he's part of that chain of being, but he's too close to God to be able to exist amongst these witches. They have these corruptible lower animals around them. The livestock and the rabbit and the crow. Or the hare and the crow. The crow is a scavenger. Its associations with the hag. All of those things. But the good dog, man's best friend. He meets a tragic end, and it's part of that same, again, that 17th century ideology that adds to the, like you said, the I don't know, the folktale of it, the immersion of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot to talk about in this one.
It really is. It is. There's so much going on in this movie.
So, what do you make of the whole point of this exercise with this family? Like, the witch is preying on this family specifically in order to recruit Thomason into the coven.
Okay.
Do you think that's
the dark? I don't think it was a recruitment for Thomason. I think you can make the argument. I think there's enough evidence that you could probably support that was let's get her. I guess I'm just looking at it from Thomason's point of view, and so I'm oblivious because I do believe that she was oblivious.
Right.
Oh
yeah, 100%.
And I believe that, when she when she has that moment with Black Phillip, it's parallel to her prayer. It's shot in a parallel way. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning, she's penitent and praying to God. It parallels to her conjuring, I conjure you, Black Phillip, you will speak to me. And she's in power. She's not begging. She's saying, you will speak to me. And he answers. And he's the first. If this is supernatural, he's the first supernatural entity to actually respond to her. Mm-hmm. And if this is a dark baptism or luring her away to be in service of the devil, that's a power. That's who was paying attention to Thomason, who was listening to what she wanted, not her family, not her God, Black Phillip.
Yeah.
So, when I look at it that way, it's like if I don't know if it was like an active recruitment so much as it was the devil happened to be around this family because of the sins the family was committing. Like if you think about, like, how there's all those parallels to Job, to the book of Job.
Yeah.
And you remember how there's that conversation in the beginning between God and Satan, where he says, Satan, go down there and menace this family, do these things to this family because I know that Job is true. I know he'll never not be true. And that's the whole point. Satan, on decree from God, comes and ruins Job's life. And if you look at the story like that, then is that what Black Phillip's there to do? And the witches just kind of happen to be out there in the wilderness because in the Puritan world, that's where they're at, But I don't know. That's just another. I was just thinking about the Job illusions and Satan's walking to, and he's walking around the world causing mischief, and God directs him to do this
testing their faith and
right,
yeah,
right. And she says, "I am Job's wife."
She does. I was going to mention that.
Yeah. And Job's wife was like, "Oh well, this God does not love me." She lost everything, so she couldn't believe that God could possibly love her.
Well, there's also, to further the biblical, and it's more than allusions at this point. It's not even subtext; it's text. Where Caleb, his mouth is closed and he vomits up an apple again.
Yeah.
You can't get much more literal than that. And
well, remember, he lied. That was his lie.
Yeah,
he had lied to protect his father. Why we were trying to get you apples, and he did. Unfortunately.
Yeah. There's a lot of deceit happening in the midst of this family from the very beginning. But I don't think that there's. I mean, I guess there's a way that do people read this film as Thomason having been in on it from the beginning? Because I really don't see that at all.
Oh, if anybody reads it that way, they just are coming at this maybe misogynistically even.
Because
I think that you're really ignorant. It would be like you're just missing so many things. I mean, everybody, the adult characters, the parents are absolutely being tested. I mean, I have sympathy for the Puritan. Like I said, I feel like there's been a degree of scorn and ridicule in portrayals of Puritans in media forever. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I can, I don't understand. I could never do this. I don't know. I just sympathize with it because it just, that with their plight, with what they've taken on, the spiritual task that they've taken on to be a Puritan, how difficult it is, and it's, you see the father, I think, just really trying.
Yeah.
And just necessity drives him to lie to his wife. The need to protect his family from starvation causes him to sin. I mean, what is that? I mean, the primitive instinct to feed your children and your partner, you do that, right? You do whatever you have to do. But he had to steal, from her to do it. He had to lie to cover what he did. Then he had to sit there and let his daughter take the blame for it, all because he felt like that was all, like he had to do this, this is what, in order to keep his family alive, he had to go through all this existential crisis. You know what I'm saying? Oh, yeah. That's a difficult spiritual path to walk.
Right.
And I think that's why you don't really see it anymore. It just was. On top of that, it was a difficult physical life. The building the city upon a hill, the coming here and not knowing what the hell you're doing.
The lengths to which the Puritans need to go to prove their faith is beyond unrealistic and unpragmatic. Yeah. And I think that's what the movie is in a lot of ways kind of commenting on, where Caleb is like, wait a minute, so Samuel would go to hell? What did he do? He's a baby. And it's like, that doesn't even make sense. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's what the dad said is, and that's just not a good enough answer, basically. And I feel go ahead.
Well, no. Well, I was just thinking of the collective, the collective just being so fearful. I mean, coming to the new world, and risking what they risked to come here and to, interpret the scriptures as they saw fit is one thing, but coming here and creating civilization, that's the isolation, the physical exhaustion, the starvation, the illness, all those things. I mean, it's terrifying. The collective that's trauma, Yeah. And so I think about Caleb having that conversation about Samuel and that real palpable fear that I could go to hell. Hell is real. Hell is real. I could go there, and the devil's out there, and these things are real, and it's not like William can be the parent where he pats his son and says, "Oh, you're just taking this too literally. You're going to be okay. God loves you. Go to bed now." No, I mean, he can't tell him that. That would be lying to his son. Right. So he's trying to comfort his son. "I love you." He says, "I love you marvelous much." I was really, really touched by that scene, but he can't. He says, "Look, we don't know." In other words, Samuel could be in hell. Oh, like, wow.
Let's pray on that. Let's pray that he is kind of thing. Yeah, and that's kind of the solution that they have at this point in time.
Rough, man. That's rough. That's a rough way to be spiritually in a physically demanding and hostile environment. That's collective trauma, and that's part of our history. That's part of our American identity. Our all the laws we pass, the things we do, it's all part of this,
They could call this, instead of a New England folktale, a United States origin story.
An origin story, sure.
Pretty
why not?
much. I mean, there's a lot of add a few hundred years, but yes.
In addition to all the New England folklore stuff that I love the aesthetic of the 17th century witch and the folklore and all that stuff. Again, I teach Macbeth and I love all of that. I'm also a huge fan of Southern Gothic, and I those are things, again, that's the American origin stories. And we love to tell the awesome romantic ones about pioneers. And then we love to tell the ones about, where we're skirting the law, we're gangsters and all that. Those are all part of our mythos. And then there's like this stuff too, that's part of what we are and who we are. They should just be, I'm grateful for the contribution to the conversation, I think. I don't know if I can really say that about the Lighthouse, but I definitely, and that it functions in that same way for me as like we said, like an American origin story. Because again, I think that's way more mythic.
It's more of a mythical allegory kind of thing, I think. Yeah.
Yes. And I think the fact that this is a folk tale means that we need to consider it with all the annals of history, all the things, the art, the poems, the music, the stories that make up where we came from and who we are today,
So throughout the course of the film, Jonas and Mercy are constantly talking about Black Phillip. And I think I love that the way that the way that the witch develops that, where we're like, are these just little kids making up stuff? I mean, we know there's a witch, but we don't see the full extent of Black Phillip's presence throughout this until the very end, obviously. And I love the way that Black Phillip was manipulating it through the children, through the greatest innocence in this family. And I think that makes his machinations throughout the rest of the story, I think it makes it that much more chilling that he actually sowed these seeds through the children, unbeknownst to even the children, really, on a certain level.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And when you consider that was all just, it was happenstance, again, it was like that goat just decided it was going to bring it, and it just gave them so much footage. When I watch it again, whenever I rewatch it, like I said, I watch it with the subtitles, and the subtitles include the lyrics to the songs the children are singing. And those add a whole nother element. The songs they're singing about him add a whole nother element to all that, to him just being,
Because it all starts with those kids saying, Black Phillip said that you're a witch, and blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, Thomason, perhaps foolishly, leans into that and kind of uses that to freak out the children.
Right.
But it was also sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, too.
Right. And you notice, too, Thomason is, because of her position in the family, like she those are her charges.
Right.
She has to monitor those children, and she hates that job, and who wouldn't? They're like two of the most obnoxious children of all time. And no older sister would want to be plagued with that responsibility. But if you notice, the thing that she complains about to them is their idleness. You play, I'm working, you're idle, you're playing, you're over there singing, you're over there, dallying, all the things that you're doing.
And then you're calling me names on top of it?
Yeah, and I think that right there is that another right out of a Puritan prayer book. The devil, if you are not at work, if you are not at prayer, then you are
that's true.
Open and susceptible to the devil.
Idle hands at the devil's workshop.
Right, and that, to be at prayer and to be at work is the only way you survive the wilderness of the time period, right? Like that doesn't just come out of that. Like that didn't just abstractly sound like a good idea. Like that's obviously been proven, by a people who are fighting the elements every day in a world they're unfamiliar with. If you aren't working, you better be praying, because this living and surviving doesn't stop. And the fact that those kids are just hopping and skipping and singing, and the goat's just, he's like Pan, like you expect him to just like bust out a set of pipes and start playing, like it's that archetypal, And of course, Pan, is a pre-Christian idea, but, Christian Europe just kind of swept up a lot of these symbols and these gods and just kind of lumped them together and made them personifications of the devil, because they were already existing in the collective of the time, And every European culture has some type of, every pre-Christian European culture has some type of horned god that means a lot of things. Typically, it doesn't mean something evil and corrupt. It usually is associated with, fertility and masculine strength, and a lot of times even lunar aspects, because the horns are kind of symbolic of the moon. And of course, when you are Christianizing Europe, you are going to borrow what's already there. I mean, we're talking about different languages. Everyone's illiterate. I mean, you just take the existing stories, you take the existing characters, and you just start rewriting them. And I think that's why the symbolism of like the goat and the devil and all that, and how, he's, like you said, talking to the children and spending time with the children. And the children also see the witch when nobody else does. She saw the witch take Samuel. Remember, Mercy said that.
Yeah.
She was like, Caleb was like, no, a wolf took her. No, I saw the witch. I see her riding on her stick. Like, and you see witches when you're not busy working or praying,
Yeah, that's true.
And the mom stops parenting once Samuel's gone, because she doesn't sleep. All she does is pray. So, yeah.
When you mentioned about them being illiterate, it made me think again of another small detail when Black Phillip appears and they have their little chat, and he makes his offer and about the book, and she says, I don't, he's like, remove your shift, and she's like, I don't know how to write my name, and he's like, I'll guide thy hand. Again, it's like she doesn't, why would she know how to write her name? Why would she, that makes perfect sense. I feel like we're kind of getting towards the climax end part here. But one of the image I think that stood out to me the most, other than the ending, which I obviously we'll get to in a second, is the when Caleb and Samuel appear to Catherine. And you know where I'm going with this. And and
that was almost as bad as the baby scene.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she's like, oh, I'll read that book with you. What do you think he's bringing Black Phillip's book? Because we never find out what book Caleb is talking about.
Well, okay, so again, I always believed that Caleb was saved, so I don't think
not
that
real Caleb, appearing as Caleb. Yes, yeah,
right.
I agree.
That's what I'm saying. I think that so we're agreeing that this is Satan manipulating Catherine by appearing as a so. Yeah, I mean that's what it sounds like to me. Like that was the opportunity for her to sign away her name in the promise that she would be reunited with her two children. Like what else would that be? That's
And then she says,
and she doesn't do it, does she? She doesn't do it, right?
No, because she's like, oh, Samuel's hungry, and then
yes.
I think it's intercut with the children discovering the witch, basically,
in the barn.
Feeding off of the goat, or like drinking the milk, I think, of the goat. Right. And then the witch turns and laughs, and it cuts to Catherine with the crow pecking at her breast. That scene, that was the moment where I was like, oh crap, it's coming.
Yeah, the shadows have fallen.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
done. We're in hell at this point. We are absolutely
100%. Yeah, the movie is just like, we're not going to play with like, is it a witch? What's going on? Yeah, there's a witch. Is it? They're like, nope, we're in full on like, yeah, exactly.
Although I still appreciate the fact, because I definitely felt that way too when I saw that scene, and I still even with that scene, I really appreciate the surprise. I mean, it wasn't like it was a huge surprise that Black Phillip spoke.
Right.
But it was pretty cool. It wasn't something I necessarily expected him to do. Like, I didn't anticipate that she would turn around and say, you're going to talk to me now. I anticipated the story ending where, when she wanders out of the barn and the thing happens to her father, and then the thing happens between her and her mother, that I would just see her kind of wander into the woods and assume that she finds the witches or she perishes in the woods, because I don't see her going back to civilization after that.
Yeah. So. Yeah, instead she has the struggle with her mother and kills her in self-defense basically, and then has a little nap basically, essentially, and then wakes up to the ominous sound of chimes. And I 100% agree with you. People listening to this, I want to point out the movie is on Netflix. I have it on Blu-ray, but I don't have a digital copy, so I actually just watched it on Netflix. And having the subtitles on does make a huge difference in relation to the language, really the songs, even like this, the sounds, the score. It really highlights elements that are like really sort of low, like subtly mixed into the soundtrack, I think. So the chimes run, and then Black Phillip appears there, and it's to the point of empathizing with the Puritans in this time period, and the plight that they're in. By the end of the movie, she has been rattled with guilt over what happened to her to the baby. She's been pointed fingers at, blamed for everything, basically turned on by her entire family, including her father, who boards them up in there with Black Phillip, just like, hey, figure it out, guys. We'll in the morning we'll go back, and he basically reneges again, sets aside the pride that led them to being banished in a way, and then is nearly choked out by her mom. So at that point, with nothing left, with her mother's blood on her, she doesn't. What is she going to do? It's kind of like she's out of options at this point. So. Yeah, living deliciously sounds kind of pretty good to me right about now.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's 100% supportable argument. And I also think that if you look at it like, does it serve its purpose as a folktale? So let's just think, so we've been evaluating his recreation, his version of a folktale, and we're saying, we appreciate these things about it. So let's just look at it like if it was actually a New England folktale. I mean, why shouldn't it be? It's just a 21st, 21st century. But yes, so it represents 17th century New England folklore. Right. Does it function? And it does, because it reinforces the assumptions of the time period. Caleb is the desirable child. Caleb is saved by God, right? The father loses everything because of pride. The mother, like you said, the sins, like the two small children are corrupted because they're idle and playful when they should be at work. And yes, the teenage girl is a witch because they're pretty much all witches.
Those teenage girls are always up to something.
Like, of course, the teenage girl would go off with the goat into the forest.
Right.
Of course she would, because she is corrupt, and that's what they would do. So absolutely. I mean, it's like it's interesting because when it functions perfectly as a folktale in that it's teaching these lessons and reaffirming these assumptions, it also, I think, does allow the audience to pass judgment on those things or evaluate those things. So that's good storytelling to me, because it didn't, how like the tropes in certain horror movies where like the cliche trope where the most sexually active girl is the first to get killed, and we all know what that, we don't think about that. We don't question that when we see that happen. There's an expectation that she will be punished and she'll be the one that deserves it, because we have to be, invested in the other character, the ones we really care about, the good ones, the ones we don't really want anything bad to happen to. Well, I didn't get that sense at all. I didn't get this, even though I can see how each character reinforced an assumption at the time. I still had sympathy for all of them. Mm-hmm. I still saw them as fleshed out and believable and authentic. So that doesn't seem like something like real easy to do, horror genre. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And to have this level of authenticity to it, as far as the language and the production design in this movie is outstanding. And
what did you like about it? Like, what stuck out for you
as far as the production design?
Yeah.
Just like the trees, the big horizons. Like, this movie makes so much use out of its setting. It's sort of remote, and you feel the sense of isolation that this family is experiencing in this movie.
A lot of wide-angle shots.
Yes.
In the forest, a lot of wide-angle shots, a lot of expansive horizons, but always the woods, right? Mm-hmm. In the background, always the woods. That's what you're always seeing back there. You see their little settlement, right? Their little farm. It's so rickety. Mm-hmm. It's so, and this dude is just chopping wood. Oh my God. Do you remember the scene? This really stuck out at me this last time I watched it. The scene where Thomasine confronts her father about his failures as a man and a father. You can't hunt. You can't farm. All you do is chop wood.
Yeah.
And he dies under that freaking pile of wood.
It's true. He does.
And it's just like it's heartbreaking, because I understand her ferocity. I understand her anger, and how, for once she's kind of standing up and saying, you know what, I'm not taking this another minute. I'm not your scapegoat. I am not the imperfect person, whatever you think I am. And if we're going to be talking about this, let's talk about you, and why we're here. And we're here because of you, and you can't do this. I mean, all those are all truths. Mm-hmm. He fails at all those tasks.
It goes back to that look that she shot his way at the very beginning of the movie, in the very first scene.
Right. And that's heartbreaking, because, that I love that actor. I remember him in Game of Thrones, and I find his voice very hypnotic. And I want him to succeed. You know, I believe his devotion to God. I believe, I admire his spirit. And that's part of our American identity too, that when he stands up and says, I will not be judged by false Christians, you know, that moment of freedom, like, I did not come here so that to be persecuted like this, you know. And I think that's powerful, and that's how we see him. That's the first, you know, that's him before his tragic fall. That's him in his height. Like, you can't judge me. You know, it's that moment in, like, The Crucible where John Proctor says, no, I'm not going to sign this paper, and you're not going to nail it to the freaking church door, because God knows how black my sins are. I don't need to write my name. This doesn't, you know, he says, is there no penitence lest it be public? Right. And it's that same moment, you know, that I think on a little slightly lesser scale. And it's not until he says, you know, they said, okay, well, are you willing to be banished over? And he says, well, I'd be glad of it. Okay, well, now you'd be glad of it. But he's caught up, you know, he's caught up in that righteousness. And that righteousness is awesome. We admire that about him, but it's also dangerous. It's that very fine line between, you know, that in that space of being righteous and making decisions from that space. And are you righteous or are you arrogant?
Right.
You know, and I think that's that moment with Thomasine where she hits him all those times, hits him where it hurts. It's like she emasculates him essentially based on, you know, the standards of the time period, all the ways that he's supposed to function as a father and a husband. He has failed that. And now he's failed as a Christian because his family has been damned. That moment where he breaks down and he says, have I damned my family? I think he dies believing that he's done that, you know.
Well, he says, corruption art is my father, I think. Something like that. Yeah. So we go through. I want to also point out that the fact that this movie is, I think, 96 minutes long in a time where it feels like every movie is 2.5 hours, which is fine if the movie allows for it. But being a folktale, I think keeping the movie, keeping it tightly edited and getting in, getting out, having a very focused story, I think is to the film's credit. So we go through, you know, 96 minutes or whatever of this level of cinematography and of acting, of, you know, production design and the writing and all of that, and then we end up at that final scene where she walks over to the woods. The witches are gathered and by the bonfire. They have I think it even said in the subtitle, snake-like chatting. So I was immediately thinking, so me actually this year doing the Harry Potter series. So immediately I was like, they're speaking Parseltongue, kind of.
Yeah.
She walks up and she's, you know, laughing and levitating and that kind of thing. And, you know, the big wide shot of her up by the treetops. So my question to you is, knowing that the story is presented from the puritanical standpoint, which obviously is no surprise, a patriarchal society, and that the movie is presented from that perspective, but we're also seeing it mostly from Thomasin's point of view. Is that ending supposed to be sort of reaffirming to the former, whereas, look, the teenage girl was the witch, I told you, or is it supposed to be sort of empowering in a weird feminist way? Like, what is your kind of breakdown of that?
I think, and I thought about this, and I think we can narrow it down. We can actually narrow that down to one question: Is it a happy ending?
That depends on who you ask.
Yeah, is it a happy ending? I don't think it has anything to do. Okay, all right. So I guess I'm going to kind of address my own question that will lead back to your questions.
Cool.
So I don't think that was a moment of happiness. So I'm answering my own question. I don't think that was a happy ending. I don't think that was a moment of happiness for her. I think there was a moment of rapture, and I think it's parallel to Samuel's rapture. And I think, again, the great, and the father says this, I think, somewhere in the story, that, you know, your achievement as a Puritan is that rapture, right? That elation, that closeness to God, you know, and all that comes with that, you know, the grace that comes with that. Well, of course, we see Samuel experience that. I mean, it's a pretty jarring situation, but it felt pretty authentic to me. And then we see this kind of parallel with Thomasine, where she walks into the circle and she, lets this happen to her. And at first, you can sort of see what's going on. It's like she walks onto like that Goya painting, right? Where it's the witches around the fire and the goat is there. And then, like when she's lifting up off the ground, I mean, she's ecstatic, she's rapturous, and she must be experiencing freedom, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I mean, I think it's feminist in that it does present an image of a woman experiencing rapturous freedom, which is not something that is typically portrayed in art. And I think in that way it's feminist. I don't know so much about the way witchcraft presents itself in the story, if that was a feminist argument, or if that, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's no doubt that the witch itself is a feminist, it can be read as a feminist symbol. There's no question. Women who are living outside of the confines of patriarchy.
Right.
And when viewed from inside patriarchy, they are wicked and terrible, and they come and they eat your babies.
How dare they have their own ideas and thoughts and all ambitions.
Or how dare they not remarry and share their property? How dare they, all the things. So, I mean, I think there are elements to that. I also just think it really is just a portrait of the 17th century cartoon witch, that this is what, they go clickety clickety and they fly around and they scream.
The witch in the barn literally turns and goes,
yeah. And I think I think that, again, he said, the director said in an interview that from the time he was a child, witches have intrigued and scared him. And he felt like a defining moment in his childhood was the Wicked Witch of the West. Mm-hmm. And that was probably the first time he felt being truly terrified by something. And I think that he's absolutely telling a story that's going to scare him.
Yeah.
Like this would scare me. This would scare the crap out of me. I mean, I grew up in New England. This is what happened here. I mean, this is what this was so real that, 19 plus people, whatever, died for it. Right. I mean, yeah.
And I think that the strength in that ending is that you can make arguments for both sides. You're like, on the one hand, clearly the witches going around and stealing babies and murdering them. That we're not advocating baby mashing on the Crooked Table podcast.
It is rough when you want to be, I want to be happy for Thomasine in that moment. I want to believe her to be free of what I've just seen her endure. Mm-hmm. I don't want to think about her snatching people's babies and doing those things,
from a perspective of her.
But again, she's going to, because she's a witch in a Puritan world, right? Like that's what's going to happen. She tries. She tries to do the things that are expected of her. She does everything the way she thinks she needs to do them to make her parents happy, to make God happy, to make everyone but her happy. Mm-hmm. Right. And she's punished for it. She's just repeatedly punished for it. And I think there is something, if we're going to look at this archetype, or, if we're going to look at this, not just archetypally, but like from a feminist perspective, and this is about how femininity is defined, or, in patriarchy and all those things. It does, when you look at Thomasine, how do you be her? How do you serve a system that hates you? How do you be in service to an ideology that finds you just disgustingly corrupt, and at the same time have a real authentic desire to know grace and to know God and to have a relationship with the divine. You know, it's got to be tough. It's got to be tough. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, where would she go? Would she go back to the plantation? They're going to ask her what happened to your parents.
And your siblings and your goats. It's like, where is everything?
Right.
Yeah.
And what would happen to her? She would hang.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
I feel like in process and talking through the ending, I feel like there are levels. Like at first you're horrified. You're like, oh my gosh, she joined the witches. That's scary. And then on the other hand, you're like, well, now she's kind of free to do her own thing, and she doesn't have to answer to, her. She's, she's more empowered than she's ever been. But then now I'm feeling like there might be a third level. I'm like, okay, well now she's not serving her father. Now she's serving the devil.
Satan.
Is that better?
Right.
I don't know.
No, again, it's a Puritan.
She's still in service to a male figure, a male authority figure.
And the joke is on her, right? Her power comes from him, not from her. So exactly. In that regard, it's difficult to see her to see that moment. Okay, it's easy to see that moment of her, flying in elation as maybe a feminist moment, but then the whole moment where he tells her to take off her clothes and sign the book, and making her be subordinate in that way. Yeah. That's certainly, I mean, again, she's still paying for that, she's still in service, like you said, to a male authority. And I think in the case of Thomasine, it's just immediate gratification with the devil. I mean, that would be the puritanical or the Christian message, not just puritanical, but the archetypal and the Christian message as the devil as the trickster. Right? Like, I am giving you what you want, and you just get to enjoy it until it's time to pay up, basically. Until it's time to pay up, right? Yeah. And so that it still does. Again, it still functions, as that. Like I said, reinforcing the assumptions of the time that. She's just being controlled by him now, Do
you think there's an element, and this, kind of the ending, watching it the second time today, reminded me a little bit of the last shot of Midsommar. Do you think there's a certain element, and I guess mild spoilers for the end of Midsommar, do you think there's a certain element of elation sort of mixed with madness? Like, is there a little bit of the character that's cracked there? Go ahead.
Okay, so you're talking about, and I'm sorry, what was the girl's, the character's name in Midsommar? Probably doesn't matter. I don't remember, yeah. When she makes the decision.
At the very end, when she's watching the I forget what the
final sacrifice.
Fire, burning, and the last shot of her face, and she's like frowning, and then it turns to a smile, like literally right before the credits roll. I feel like, I think Florence Pugh, in that film, I think she said that she was playing it sort of like her character is kind of like snapped a little bit, or lost sense of reality. But you could also read into it, or is she empowered from that toxic relationship, like liberated from it? And I think kind of both in a way. And I feel like The Witch, there's a certain element of, well, I've just seen my whole family got killed. A goat just told me to sign a book, and now I'm floating. There's a little bit of her being that she's kind of lost touch with what's going on around her, and it mixed in with everything else that she's experiencing in that moment.
Well, I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, I mean, again, there's both things have that moment of freedom, and that can absolutely be freedom from sanity. Mm-hmm. I do feel like for Midsommar, for me, as I was watching it, the whole time I kept judging their relationship and feeling like this is so toxic, and this is so part of why she is the way she is. Being in a relationship like that, and how it compounded her anxiety and all of the things, and how inauthentic he always was with her, and how she was intuiting he was inauthentic, but he feels himself noble in his inauthenticity because it's out of his desire to protect her from some terrible truth. And she just, destroys that part of herself, I think, by destroying him.
Right.
So yeah, but I was so like for that was kind of how I kind of read that. I think like kind of like that. I don't know if it's Jungian, if it's like a Jungian idea, but this idea that like in your dreams, you are every character in your dreams is you. So whatever you're in conflict with, whatever you're interacting with is some aspect of you. And Midsommar feels very unconscious, like it's very dreamy to me, like the color palette, everything, that the sound. And so I kind of just looked at her. I looked at that as like, it was like all these things were kind of projections of her. But anyway, I'm probably reading way too much into that, but that was, I don't know. That's so, yeah. So when I think about Thomason, I mean, you just kind of burn it all, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't go back.
It's a very rich ending. I mean, I think we probably could have done a podcast episode just on the last shot of this movie and be like, well, what is happening? Let's break it down. These are the 5 central emotions that Thomason's probably feeling right now.
Right.
So no, I think that's kind of a good point to wrap that up on, just because I feel like it is kind of an unanswerable question. It's really depending on what you're bringing. I mean, as most films are, what you're bringing to it and how you want to interpret the events that's sort of playing out on screen.
Well, I think that the intended reaction was for us to see it both ways. Mm-hmm. I think that, obviously the nuance is intentional. I think if you only see it as a horror movie about the devil and how the devil is out to get us, then you really miss the complexities of character. You really miss the story being about less about the devil and more about a religious crisis, a crisis of not faith, but it wasn't. I never felt like again, I'm looking at William, the patriarch of the family, as the representation of the Puritan ideal, or the striving towards the Puritan ideal. And I don't think that he was having a crisis of faith. I think his faith was pretty solid. I think he was kind of having a crisis of action, like what to do.
Right. Because
he kept finding himself having to be dishonest, and he kept compounding his sins. So I don't know. I mean, I think that if we just look at it like, oh, it's a story about the devil, it's a horror movie, and I kind of like. I mean, there are several horror movies about the devil that I like. I have a fondness for like, again, Rosemary's Baby and The Omen come to mind. Right. I like that kind of story, and. But again, I think if you look at it that way, you really are missing what he intended. I don't think it's that much about the devil at all. I think the devil is a character in the story, but I don't think it's about him.
I agree 100%. I think people coming with that more superficial read explains why a lot of people a lot of people came out of this movie being like, what the hell did I just watch? Like, I don't think they appreciated all the depth to it, that they were just like, I just wanted to see some crazy shit happen on screen. And I was like, what the hell? This lady's floating. I don't get it.
The marketing campaign was pretty ingenious. Yeah. They had a really great marketing campaign. And I think that, like you said, I mean, we've grown accustomed to certain things in horror. And I'm glad that definition is expanding to, like I said, include me, because I am a chicken. I don't like jump scares. I don't like being real grossed out. I just don't have it in me. I just want a really good, creepy story that it doesn't even have to be as layered and as deep as The Witch. I mean, The Witch was special in that regard. I certainly don't think Rosemary's Baby was anywhere near as layered and as deep as The Witch, but it was a really entertaining movie. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know.
Awesome. Well, if we don't have anything else to mention about The Witch, Amy Otero, can you, I guess, tell people where they can find you on social media? Do you have anything like you want to
Yes,
mention?
I do. I'm on Twitter.
Okay.
Yes, I am on Twitter. Thank you.
What is your handle there?
It's just Amy Otero.
Okay.
It's pretty boring.
No, that works perfectly. Straightforward.
I have an almost non-existent social media presence. I rarely use Twitter, but I can't imagine anybody wanting to find me on Facebook, as I don't know. But anyway.
Well, I will be tagging you when I post the episode, so people that might hear this might be like, "Oh, that Amy person, she spoke so eloquently about The Witch. I have to see what she's about."
Well, again, I love talking about story.
Well, then
story's awesome.
I would love to have you back on at some point to talk about another movie. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about The Witch. I actually hadn't seen it since I think I got it at Redbox or something, like soon after it hit home video, and then bought it on like Blu-ray on Black Friday or something like that, and I hadn't watched it until now, so it was a good reason to go back and watch it again.
Right.
And it's really a special movie. I agree.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it too. Thank you. You have a great night.
Thanks, you too. If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
The art of a little KED.